So today I want to take this opportunity to talk about estate planning. I have got Ann Fowler Cruz with us. She is an attorney and partner at Cohen and Wolf, and she's been helping me with a number of my clients to just kind of walk through the importance of estate planning and why not just maybe the wealthy or how you would think the wealthy need it, but really everybody needs to really think about what they want done with their assets, their portfolio, and their wishes in the inevitable event that someday we're not going to be here. So I wanted to bring Ann on today and we can have a discussion. Is that all right, Ann?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
A lot of people don't know what estate planning is. So if you
Mhm.
don't mind, could you just give a brief synopsis on what you think estate planning is?
Very often I have people come in and say, I want some planning done or I don't have enough money for an estate plan. So I guess everyone comes in with their own different perspectives. I just start off with planning, right? Planning for incapacity and planning for death. And most of these documents talk about what your wishes are. They speak for you when you're not capable of speaking, whether you're incapacitated or at death. So that's the way I view planning here.
And Ann, no, I appreciate that. And it's kind of interesting. So Ann and I were kind of having a conversation before we started this podcast. And one of the things that I've come across is that people often think that their beneficiaries are always going to agree. So why do I need an estate plan? And when I brought that up to Ann, I could see her eyes light up. And the reason is that you
Yeah.
always use the analogy that one child might say, "Hey, mom said something to me at Christmas, but she said something different to their sister at a ball game." And then it can actually become an emotional arm wrestle if these
Uh,
things aren't laid out. So I don't know if you've had experiences like that, Ann, but I have.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think most families get along, most families work it out, but there's always families out there that don't. A lot of that emotional, trauma in their life kind of bubbles up at death or at incapacity. And
Mm.
yes, it's the mom promised me this. I have families fighting over just assets that don't have a lot of value, tangible property that don't have a lot of monetary value, but have an emotional attachment. So for me, I tell clients, communicate. Communicate in writing, communicate verbally, whatever it is, communicate in legal documents, make your wishes known so that it's clear. These estate planning is a gift to our family, a gift to our beneficiaries.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And so as you've been doing this, and obviously you've been doing this for a number of years, what are the biggest challenges you come across in this field?
Well, I think challenge number one is getting people to come in,
Mm.
right? To have this. People don't want to talk about death or incapacity, losing their power, right? Their control. It's not comfortable for people. It always seems to go, tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. So,
Mm.
number one, getting people in and then starting that conversation. Some people don't want to have the conversation. And then a lot of the times, are the kids don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Like, right? I don't want to hear it, mom. I don't want to hear it. So, again, how do we start those conversations? So, that's very hard. And then when we finally get them in and they're ready to have the conversation, the next piece is who's going to be our agents? Who are we picking?
Mm.
Even from the guardian of our babies, right? That's always huge. The young families struggle with that and don't plan because they can't agree on the guardian of their children if something should happen. So again, I like to think that we try and help them through that process, talking about skill set and who's appropriate and all the different levels of people available, whether it's family and then friends and then professionals. So we try to help people come to those answers.
No, I think that's great. And so one of the challenges that I have is disorganized finances. We've talked about this offline and during some of our meetings. Through the course of life, we accumulate. And we accumulate a lot. And it could be an old 401k that was left at an old employer, several bank accounts.
Mm.
But one of the challenges that I've come across is sitting with somebody that's got 11 account registrations. Those registrations are all at different institutions. They don't remember who their beneficiaries were. There isn't anybody overseeing it. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, Ann, and say, is there any time you've come across that and can see why it's difficult? And do people in that situation really need to think about creating an estate plan?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I find that to be one of the most important things that I do when we talk about planning. The documents say one thing, but their assets say another.
Yeah,
So I want people to come in or we talk about it because devil's in the details, and
yeah,
we go through every asset. And I say, well, who's the beneficiary?
yeah,
Most of the time they're like, oh, I don't know. And
yeah,
then sometimes when they remember, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't change it to my kids. It's my mother before I was
mhm,
married," right? That IRA that's been floating out there. So it's a huge piece of what I do, and I'm sure with you as well. We
yeah,
have to make sure that there's beneficiaries on these assets. And when they're all over the place, they're scattered, chasing those CDs or,
yeah.
whatever it is, those old IRAs. How about those life insurance? It is important, especially as we get older, I think, to kind of consolidate and simplify.
No, I completely agree with you. And from my chair, one of the biggest challenges that I have is going through all of these things and realizing that the beneficiary at some point is going to have to figure it out. Now, you
Yeah,
can lay down, okay, here's where everything is, but it's very difficult for them to pick up the call. First of all, it's an emotional time. They just lost somebody they care about. I've gone through cases. One of my worst was 60 different account registrations at 60 different institutions. Now, the father did very well, and he thought he was doing well by his family by diversifying. It took two
right.
and a half years. That's not an exaggeration. It took 2.5 years to
Yeah,
contact each one of these places, get the proper paperwork, get death certificates where they need to go. And as good as he was as asset accumulation, he did nothing for estate planning. And so
yeah,
ultimately it left the children with a mess. And that's one of the reasons why I've been working with Ann is because I've sat with clients and I've seen some of this. Another one, and this is a case that Ann and I have worked on, there's people that accumulate these assets and they want it to go to another generation, whether it's their kids or their nephews or their nieces. But not all of those nephews and nieces have the same personalities. And they also don't have the same spending habits. So then we get into conversations. Well, do you want to leave somebody that you're not comfortable knows how to handle finances with 6 figures or even 7 figures? And if you don't have that wish, what are the options? And walk through like some of the things that we would do. Let's say you got 5 different beneficiaries, 2 of them are really good with money. One is a question mark, it's too young to make the decision. And then there's 2 of them that spend in a way that you're not comfortable with. Like, how do we address things like that?
yeah. Well, again, it's part of the conversation, right? I think some people say equally to my beneficiaries. Well, that's easy, right?
Yeah.
But our beneficiaries aren't all the same, as you said. So we need to kind of look at each beneficiary. And I love if we can kind of put a number to what they'll be inheriting. Now, we don't know what you'll have when you pass away, but let's look at it from a tomorrow perspective. We're talking $200,000 to this beneficiary. I had a case this morning and the beneficiaries are grandchildren. And I'm like, well, are you comfortable giving that 10-year-old $200,000? Of course not. 18 years old, 21. Again, having those conversations. Are they disabled? Are they spenders? Are we worried about divorce? Are we worried about creditors? Because then we can craft perhaps a trust of
Mhm.
some sort for potentially each beneficiary or for their needs, right?
Yeah.
How best would it be suited to take care of this beneficiary, whether it's outright in trust? It's all part of the discussions.
And this is why estate planning and financial planning go hand in hand, in my opinion. Because now let's say you sit with an estate planning attorney like Ann, and she says we need to create a trust. Well, she can create the trust, but if the accounts aren't re-registered, then it doesn't matter. So let's say Ann sits down and you've got yourself a kid that you're not necessarily comfortable with how they spend money, or you're not necessarily comfortable with the marriage that they're in. There's a number of different things, and you say to yourself, okay, let's create a trust. And you go through all of that work, but you don't go to all the institutions that you have to re-register your non-qualified accounts in the name of that trust, then it was really for no point at all. So this is where I like to work with attorneys like Ann, because now on my end, she lets me know that the trust has been created, and then I can go through all the assets and make sure all the accounts are titled properly. Then
Uh,
when there's accounts outside, I can consolidate those under our umbrella and make sure that everything is exactly the way that was drawn up in your estate plan. So this is why I've been really enjoying these types of relationships, because I do think it really goes hand in hand.
Absolutely, Jared, you're wonderful with the clients, but also with understanding that it's a team. I can't do this without your help. I can draft the document, but if the assets aren't titled properly, it's a waste of time and energy. And you don't want someone to say, here's your trust, goodbye. You really must work with those beneficiary designations with the financial advisor to make sure they flow the way you want them to flow. And isn't it nice that you can get a hold of Jared, a
Yeah.
phone call, a voice, but working with some of these companies and they're just a big black hole.
Mhm.
Dealing with computer share, for example,
Yeah.
those MetLife stock that fall through the crack, right?
Mhm.
It's a nightmare. That's why it takes 2 years sometimes because everything's everywhere and you're talking to a 1-800 number and you get somebody else different the next day and different the next day. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah, and in a lot of those cases too, they send you the paperwork. And they're not gonna fill it out. They
I
give
know.
you the paperwork and you don't understand the way it's written, you don't understand, the legal language, you don't understand ultimately what they're looking for. And
Right.
that right there is never going to be a good situation for you or for the estate plan. And so
Yeah.
then you just put it off, and this is why this dialogue, I think, is very valuable. So,
Yeah.
let's say and a client comes into your office, brand new, and you're going to try to figure out ultimately they say they need an estate plan, they say they need a trust, they say they need a will, but these are just terms that they've heard.
Yep.
What is your process like? What do you do with that person from start to finish? And you kind of
Yeah.
walk through with my clients how that goes.
Sure, sure. So I spend a lot of time educating, right? As I'm sure you do as well. Because
Mm,
they are words, they're terminologies, and they all mean something different. So I walk through kind of the major documents that I think everyone should have.
mhm,
Power of attorney to handle your finances if you are alive but incapacitated. Healthcare instructions to make your medical decisions if you're alive but incapacitated, and then upon death, whether it is a will or a trust.
mhm,
So again, I will go in detail again what these documents do for someone and how they fit into the plan. But that's kind of the basic foundational documents that everyone should have. And I tell people, my daughter turned 18. I
mhm.
had her sign a power of attorney in healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? She's an adult now. So I had her sign these documents. Maybe not a will, she doesn't have anything yet, right? But these are important documents. So you talk about when, maybe 18, right?
Mm,
And certainly as you start to accumulate or you have children, right? Guardians and trusts and things like that become super important. Funny that you asked about trust because clients come to me all the time and say, I need a trust.
yeah.
I want a trust. And I'm like, okay. I say, trust is a solution
Mhm.
to a goal or a concern. Let's back up and let's talk about what you're trying to accomplish first.
Sure.
Because trust is a generic term, right? It's like an automobile. Well, what kind of automobile do you need or want,
Mm,
right? So I go through that process and talk about, okay, let's see if we can get them to tell me what their goal is. I don't want to put words in people's mouths. I want to hear from them what they're trying to do. So many times it's I want to make it easy for my children when I pass away, right? I want to avoid the probate, whatever that means to them.
mhm.
And that type of trust tends to be a revocable trust.
Yeah.
But then there's hundreds of other trusts, asset protection trust for long-term care, trust for my spending daughter, right?
Mm,
I have a trust that upon my death, it goes in trust for my daughter. She's 22 and a spender.
mhm.
So it's in a trust for her benefit because I don't think she's quite ready. So again, all of those conversations kind of, add to the layers and the depths and the flavors of the document.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And one thing I wanted to kind of take a step back with, because that
Mm,
word trust being revocable versus irrevocable, I think is important.
huge.
Because I have a
Mhm.
lot of clients that say, I hear put it in a trust. I have it in a trust. Therefore, if I go into a long-term care facility, it's not going to be a reportable asset. Can you just touch really quick on the difference between a revocable trust and irrevocable trust? And you don't have to
Sure.
get too crazy with it, but just enough so clients know there is a difference.
Absolutely, because I could talk about it for hours, but yes. So a revocable trust is fully available to you. It's tax neutral while you're alive. It is yours,
Mhm.
right? It is a tool for management and for, death planning. The irrevocable or irrevocable trust
Mhm.
tends to be a trust in which you can't modify, you can't change. And once you put assets into that type of trust, you are giving up ownership and control, whether it's to minimize estate taxes or to protect an asset by giving it away through the use of a trust in the event you need long-term care. So yes, I have that problem all the time. Clients come into me and say, I have a revocable trust, my assets are protected. And I'm like, no, no, wrong type of trust.
That's great. And then I guess the really kind of the last question I would have for you, and I get this all the time too, is how often should they be reviewing these documents? This is
Yeah.
something where I always tell people in 5 years, and I challenge everybody with this. In 5 years, you've experienced some major life change, whether that is somebody new in your family, whether that's somebody not in your family anymore, whether it's a wedding, whether it's there's a million different things. But I feel for me, 5 years, we experience something.
Mm.
What would be for you to say, okay, how often should we be reviewing these documents to make sure that they're still in place based on your current goals and wishes?
I think that they absolutely need to be reviewed. As you said, people come and go in our lives for many reasons, right? I think I say 3 to 5,
Okay.
somewhere around there, especially as people age, yeah, their agents may age out, may pass away, may become ill, right? And then
Mhm.
I also say any major life events, right? Diagnosis, disease, divorce, anything like that that can be a little bit life changing. We need to look at the documents again. And I always say, let's just blow the dust off. Let's just look at them again and review them again. And again, remember to review assets because they get changed through those years too. And just tweak it. Make sure it's still working for you.
Hey, perfect. Hey, Ann, I want to thank you so much for
Of
taking
course.
this time. It's incredibly valuable, and I think our relationship is valuable as well because we can really work together and come up with solutions for clients that maybe us alone in a silo wouldn't be able to think through the same way. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate your time today, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll be doing more of these in the future, and if there's any topics you'd like me to touch on, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.